Welcome to Make Your Own Fun. I am here with poet Brian Ellis. He is the author of the most recent collection, Against Common Sense, from Limit Zero Publications. And oh my gosh, folks, I believe he has been nominated for 6 pushcart prizes. So congratulations on that. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I guess I just wanted to touch base and pick your brain and ask you what you do when you really, really want to write a poem, but you just can't. You got your hands full. You're driving. You're at work. What are some of the things that you do to make sure you don't kind of lose that, what I like to call the lightning zygote idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to craft your life to be ready to capture those moments when you come. You have to hide notebooks all over your house and keep them on your person, or record it any way you can, in your notes app, clipboard. Everybody, all writers have that experience of like falling asleep right before bed, and you get that like amazing idea, and you think like, oh, I'll definitely remember this in the morning, and you never will. And so you have to decide whether it's worth it to get up or not. Um, yeah. And there was this, I'm from Boston, and there was this poet when I was younger. And I think he's passed now, but his name was Brother Blue. He was like this well-known, he was a Boston fixture, and he used to like improvise in the 70s, like on Boston Common. And all of his poetry was improvised. He was just like coming up with improvisations. And people would ask him, like, Brother Blue, how do you do it? And he said that he tried to make his life so that he was inspired as often as possible. Um, and so when you decide to be a writer, you have to you actually have to change your life in order to be able to capture these things.
That's very true. It's very true. So, in doing my research here, I came across one of your older poems and your performance of that poem on YouTube. And I'd like to kind of pick your brain also on this and just ask for the genesis or the inspiration behind your poem, Many Mansions.
Yeah, so I that's great. Sometimes we write these poems, and poems have these like, hidden clues, or like, it's the tip of the iceberg, and that's one of those poems that has a lot going on underneath. When I lived in Boston, I had a ton of roommates. We started out in one small apartment. There was like 6 of us in the 3 bedroom, and then we moved into a bigger place, and we had like 15 roommates. And one of my roommates, my good friend Shane, performed under the moniker Many Mansions. That Many Mansions was his music project a long time. It was like a mix of like folk music and tape loops and electronic beats. And he had this idea of like abundance and expansion, which is where Many Mansions comes from. But I had this idea of thinking about these people that we live with, and as you invite more people in, you don't actually lose space, you gain space, right? So within this house, there are many mansions, right? There's like we're expanding space the more people we invite in. And so that's what that poem is about.
Excellent. And would you be so kind if you have anything within arm's reach, if you have a poem that you'd like to
Oh
share
yeah.
with everyone?
I thought I would just I have my new book out. I have to be a good, being a poet means being a good salesman. Um, and so I just thought I would read the title poem from Against
Excellent.
Common Sense. So this is Against Common Sense. William of Ockham was an English Franciscan monk, philosopher, and theologian. He is most well known for his maxim non sunt multiplicanda entia sine necessite, or entities must not be multiplied beyond necessary, also known as Occam's razor. Occam himself didn't call it Occam's razor. The term was first used by Sir William Hamilton in 1852. Sir Hamilton is credited with a really fun logic game where if some self-righteous asshole asks if everything is purple is poison, and if these pills are purple, then are all dogs pugs, or whatever, whatever. The gist of Occam's maxim is correctly stated as scientific theories with the least number of premises are easiest to disprove. Aristotle, in one of the few things he did correctly, set science on the business of disproving things, not proving things. Proving things is next to impossible. For each accepted explanation of a phenomenon, there is a nearly infinite number of possible and more complex explanations. But disproving things has been shown in the course of human endeavors to be immensely useful, much as Copernicus did in 1543 when he disproved the idea that the sun revolved around the earth. 196 years after the death of Occam. This means that your good buddy Occam was born and died believing that the sun was a planet that lived between Venus and Mars. Occam's razor is often misquoted as the simplest explanation is most often the correct one. This diverges from Occam's science in that science is not in the business of explanation, but unexplanation, and that simplicity should be reserved for questions, not answers, and leaves out the dangerous history of simplicity, how simplicity and bad science were used as a cudgel by Europe against the rest of the world, how bigotry and envy wore the mask of simplicity in order to cut open the face of the earth, to watch it bleed from dissection, and to think of it only as learning, to allow hypocrites like Thomas Paine, frothing at the mouth, calling for freedom while tightening the chains of oppression with their hands, to do all that and to call it common sense.
Wow. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So building on that, for you, what defines a performance poem versus only something that can be read or shared on the page, or is it just really up to the reader? Because in my own experience, there are some things where I think this is great, that I've written, and I think, but I wouldn't want to go to an open mic or a reading and read this because I just I don't know if it's just more for myself or just the way that it's written. I mean, you've done a lot of slams, so I really wanted to pick your brain about that.
My attitude is that there's no difference.
Easy answer.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot to say about this, but bottom line, top line, headline is like no difference. It's all the same. I mean, I think genre can be over if we really want it to be. Let's break down these boundaries. They're really arbitrary. They're really artificial. I think there are some poets who there's really like it is a visual. What they're doing is visual, right? I think there are collage poets. There's erasure poetry. That it's like you really need to see what's happening on the page to get something happen. Absolutely, there is a visual aspect, and for some poetry, it's meant to be something to be looked at. Going back to even like Scott Adams and Understanding Comics, letters are an artistic art form. That is a visual art. So like writing is this weird space where it is technically a visual art, right? These, every character in the alphabet, it used to be a complicated logo that we've sharpened down into these very simple shapes. On the other hand, I think we need to get free about our ideas about performance. I think, there's for generations, performance artists have been like showing us the way. And I think we can dissolve some of these artificial things. I think you can, employ technology and, cassette tapes and loop pedals if you really wanted to create those like layered effects. Having said all that, there are obviously demands of medium and demands of stage and demands of show and production, right? There are some events where some types of poetry do better, right? Based on the expectation of the audience and based on where you're at as a poet. And I think it's all about letting the poem speak, and asking the poem how it wants to be presented. And so sometimes, we get the instinct like I wrote this poem and I want to protect it. I don't want to read this out loud. I'm not ready to share it yet. And I think that's absolutely valid, right? Like I think one of the powerful things about writing your own poetry is that you are, or your own writing, your own stories, is that you are the ultimate authority on that work, right? No one can tell you what your poems mean. No one can tell you, what they're about other than you. And it's so rare. I mean, it's rare in the world for us to be an authority on something, It's like, but whatever you say about your own poetry, you're automatically right. Which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that and say that in my own experience, I just, and it's more of a connection thing. I think
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to performing things that I enjoy, classic literature and older poetry, but I myself can't see reading something like that in front of an audience. Maybe it's because we're so impatient as an audience these days, but I mean, I can enjoy that stuff. And I see it for its value and its work and the craftsmanship that goes into it, of course. But I've just always felt that older things, I can't imagine. I mean, unless you're going to do like an Andy Kaufman thing and try to read the Iliad or something like that.
Well, I think I think it's, again, it's all about the room, right? And it's all about the performance. I think you could absolutely read some Robert Burns, right? Or you could, or whoever, and read some Walt Whitman. Like go to like go to a dance club and read some Walt Whitman. I think it depends upon if you're really there to connect with the audience or not.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
sometimes you got. I mean, I've been to 1 billion open mics, right? I mean, I think if you're a poet and an adult, like you've been to so many of these things, and sometimes somebody shows up with a chip on their shoulder, right? And they're like, I'm gonna read like this, I'm gonna read some Sylvia Plath. I'm gonna teach these kids a lesson,
Uh,
and they read the work and they get the reaction that they're trying to, which is a negative one, right? Like you showed up not to listen or to communicate or to have communion. You showed up to have a conflict. You showed up, which is fine. I mean, conflict has its place, right? I mean, good conflict is good. But I think, I think you can go and read the Gettysburg Address and blow people's minds, right? There's beautiful language, there's beautiful, wording and some of that older stuff. And if you read it in such a way that's like an invitation to pleasure, I think people respond every time. I
well,
mean,
yeah, and like you're saying, I think too, and I believe the correct number is we've probably both been to 11 billion open mics,
yeah,
but
that's the accurate number. Yeah,
yeah,
really
yeah. But I,
precise.
I kind of feel like you can do things, especially, and I'm gonna make myself sound so old when I say this, but you can make older things fresh, and you can, for the TikTok generation, I mean, you can say things like, "Oh my God, look at this guy or this girl reading, Emily Dickinson while she break dances. Oh my God, I've never seen this." But it's more of the knee jerk reaction to this thing that they're doing rather than, well, what are they saying? It's just, yeah, but they have 15 or 30 seconds to get their point across, and oh my God, and so it can be done. It's just, that's just a personal thing for me. But building on that,
Yeah, I just want to say to,
sure.
if anyone out there is doing Emily Dickinson while breakdancing, I want to see it. I mean, that sounds
Don't tempt
good.
me. Don't tempt me. I haven't been into any
Yeah.
open mics where I've moved here yet, but there's time for that yet.
Yeah.
So do you feel like your wheelhouse as a writer is more observational or confessional? Do you feel like there's some
Mm.
things that, like, if you're on a vacation somewhere, you can't turn that part of your brain off? Because I think people watching is really fun, and it kind of maybe turns more into a short story. And I know you write fiction too, so I'd like to get
Yeah.
your sense on that.
I I definitely, for a long time, I wrote almost exclusively confessional stuff.
Mm,
And it was not about like I needed to tell my story or I thought my story should get out there or even that I was, more important than anyone else. Again, it came for me, it came back to authority and whose story I'm allowed to tell. And I was like very careful for a long time, thinking like I'm allowed to tell my story, right? Like that's like I feel confident in telling my story. And I think as I got a lot of stuff off my chest, out of my system, I slowly felt more comfortable expanding. And I've really just recently gotten to a place where, my poems start to border more on the fictional now. And fiction in terms of like this isn't my life. This is an invented life. These are invented characters. Yeah, that's only been recently that I've been able to branch out, because I had so much to work on. And and for a long time I felt like I had a deficit. I felt like for years I felt like I was behind. I felt like I had a lot of poems to write and I wasn't my my skills weren't where I wanted them to be. I didn't feel like I was a good enough writer, and I was trying to write as much as I could because I felt like I had this really false idea of like other people being ahead of me. I think the world of being a writer, there's so much comparison and so much competition, and like I think writers, I mean this happens in all art forms, but writers are really pitted against each other.
mhm.
um, and whether that's a poetry slam or getting a residency or getting an award, you're always submitting. You're always getting evaluated, you're always getting judged.
That's true.
um, and and I never caught up. You never catch up to where you think you should be. It's never going to happen. I just got to a point where I realized it was never going to happen, where I was like, I'm not going to in the course of my life, I'm not going to be able to write down every story I have an idea for. It's just not possible.
Mhm.
So I just need to relax, and enjoy myself more. And so I've been expanding, beyond the confessional.
Okay. I can definitely relate to that, especially when it comes to kind of like writing prompts with certain styles of writing where you're trying to write like a, I don't know, Fibonacci, or you're trying to write a sonnet, or to see if you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
do it. I mean, just to see if you can mess with the form. And it's kind of like trying to write that perfect, like Beatle-esque 3 minute pop song. It's like so much is happening in this 3 minutes, and oh my God, how am I going to do this? And they're on this crazy certain level. But when it's just about me and my experiences, my issue is I trying to put up the floodgates because it's just kind of just pours out of me, and I have
yeah,
whenever I have the free time, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna sit and write a poem, and well, that's never gonna happen. But if you're chasing the feeling of something that you went through and trying to get that down, then it's kind of like, oh well, I eventually I have to eat something and go and run errands
I,
and make the life stuff happen. But when it comes
yeah,
to prompts, because I'm always kind of like, oh well, I want to try this other thing. I want to, you know, just try to get out of my comfort zone or whatever. And then it's like I notice when I'm forcing myself to try a foreign poem or something, I'm like, I really feel like, and this is just me, I'm in there with like the chisel and the hammer going like, oh, okay, I need to get this analytical side of my brain to work. And how do I get
yeah, yeah,
pieces to fit together? I feel like I'm
yeah,
sitting there with like a box of Legos going like, this can't be this hard. I mean, and they're just Legos. They're literally made to build on each other. Why is this so hard? So
yeah.
have you had some fun or issues with prompts and things like that?
For years, I avoided prompts. I avoided form. I avoided all that stuff. All of my 20s, basically. I avoided that stuff like the plague. And people would ask me to like go to workshops or lead workshops, Um, and I'd be like, no, I could, and I liked workshopping in terms of editing. I loved an editing workshop. I was always there for that stuff. Like, because when it comes to like, you know, cutting words or being harsh to the poem itself, that I understood, really well. I was like, oh, I can be rigorous about editing. But when it came to generative workshops, right, or prompts or things like that, I always avoided them because I was like, I've got enough homework. I've got, like I don't need to, why would I stop writing my poems in order to write these other poems? Like that doesn't make any sense to me. I've got too many poems to write. I'm going to die at any minute. Like, why would I do that? That was my attitude for a long time. And also too, I used to get in big arguments with my good friend Artie Maffa, and he was a poet, and he loved form. He loved limericks. He told me once. I think he said this, kind of just to make me upset. But he was like, poetry is just basically another form of a crossword puzzle. And I was like, oh my God, like what are you saying? And to him, he was like, it was a game, and I was like, this isn't an effing game. This is my life. Like, what do you mean?
How dare
Like
you
what
say it?
could yeah, this is serious, and that was real for me at the time, right? Like in a very in a that was real for me at the time. It was life or death. That's the way I treated poetry. And it's not to say that the light bulb has turned on now, and I think it's just a game now. Although I think what I've learned is that play can be beautiful, right? Like that freedom in that play is like can be something really gorgeous and elevated, right? I think, I discovered that a crossword puzzle can be an art form if it's done at a high enough level. Um, and so I've opened my heart to prompts. I started writing my own. Um, yeah, and have like, changed my mind about the generative workshop.
We all come around at some point. Well, speaking of coming around, I would love to hear another poem if you have one handy.
I do. I well, do we have I have a longer one. Is that all right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. This one's called Buying Poison on Food Stamps. One, Edward got a job. After 9 months of searching, 9 months of begging, prostrating, after a 9 month heart attack, a fall and a winter and a spring, of charging his brother to sleep on the couch, charging Travis to sleep on the floor, skipping meals so his kid and his kid's mom didn't have to skip meals. Poverty is a skateboard you ride drunk. Any random push could send everything out from under you. But now Edward has got something, landed a gig at the bread factory or the fabrication shop or just that big hole down by the river called Progress. And this guy, Edward, hasn't worked his first shift yet. This guy who is not his boss or even who hired him, but still seems in charge of his fate, is telling Edward that he needs to pay for his uniform or safety equipment or deposit on locker rental or whatever it is. This job that he got because he needs them to give him money now wants him to pay for whatever before he even starts. And this place pays every other week, and you don't get paid until the second pay cycle. So that's like a month away. And this guy wants $63. Why such a specific number? How'd they even come up with that? And Edward is opening his wallet, taking out his credit union debit card. And yes, Edward refuses to use the big banks. He reads the news. People don't know that about him, but he does. And he knows there isn't 63 on that debit card. He knows that he's going to get hit with the fees and that 63 is going to turn into 144 overnight. Too, it's hard to sleep. Edward lifts the pale light of his phone that he keeps near his head, and the numbers don't make sense. It's slow anger o'clock at night. It's zoetrope of ex-lovers o'clock at night. It's short of breath o'clock at night. It's shivering pain in the morning. It's his kid kicking hard in the morning. It's wandering the apartment in the morning, trying to sleep in a chair in the morning. And what is a household anyway? That's what Tess at the Department of Human Services wanted to know. Or was it Margaret, Angela, Bruce? Was it the first time he went in on the 4th, the 7th, the 9th? Will it work better if I lie and say that I'm married? Will it work better if I lie and say that I'm not? It can be a problem if you're too poor, but it can also be a problem if you're not poor enough. And while you're at it, please fashion evidence of all of your past failures. 3. Edward walks into the plaid pantry 5 minutes after 4 a.m. He walks to the beer cooler. It's locked, but that doesn't stop him from checking. Takes a trip down the middle aisle and picks up a king-size Snickers, the one above all that claims satisfaction, takes it to the counter, and after the cashier rings it up, produces his Oregon Trail card. And the cashier, who is wearing a name tag that Edward is too sad to read, this cashier, this Douglas or Darren or Davis or Darlene, sneers at him. You think that I don't deserve this? Let me tell you something about entitlements. There is no just way to live in this country. Do you think it's somehow more ethical to purchase high fructose corn syrup with cash? I know all the tricks. I know about transferring funds from one empty account to another, and in that alchemy, render them invisible. I know about begging to get the cell phone turned back on. I know about partial payments. I know about the futility of pinching pennies, about the coin that costs more to produce than there is to be gained from spending it. I am the penny. So tell me, what poison you think I deserve? Which of these ammonia bright death formulas are low enough for me? I just need one more heart attack to get through the day. I just need one more stroke to wake me up. I need one more amnesia to keep me going. I just want to belong, to join the ranks of all the other everyday evil, unworthy Americans. I am a tick standing at the base of a mountain of leeches. So, wielder of capital, low-born gatekeeper of the fluorescent spotlight of caste, please let me take my sugar salt death bag in peace and once more return to the insomniac brutality of the American night.
Wow. Thank you for that. That was
Yeah.
outstanding. I have asked a few other writers that perform their work this, and I'm curious to see what you say. Have you ever performed to complete silence only to be told later that people really enjoyed the poem? Like as you're, up there bearing your soul, going like, "Oh man, I thought this was really gonna connect," and oh Jesus, what is wrong with these people? Like, are they dead inside? What the hell's going on? And then you go off stage, and then like you get your coffee or you do whatever, and then after the show, somebody comes up and say either they will pick out a certain line or they'll say something like, "I just didn't want to say anything. I was riveted."
Yeah. I mean, the short answer is yes. That's dozens of times. I think, I I once performed to an audience of inmates who were you know on leave or had been let go at the White Plains Public Library, and you've never heard a more quiet audience. I mean, absolute silence, and they were just listening.
Hmm.
Like I did the whole set, and I and it was and I'm not a big on banter. And I always just feel like it's weird. It's like, why am I, the poems are just talking. So like I talk and then I stop talking to talk. Like I always had a problem with that. And so I was just reading poem after poem, right? I'm on stage, I'm just reading poem after poem, and they're silent, and I think they're hating it. So I'm like digging deeper. I'm trying to get more emotional. I'm making more eye contact. You know what I mean? I'm like drilling the poems into them, and it's just silence. And the set ends, and they lose their minds. They like loved it. They were cheering, they were applauding, they loved it so much, and I had no idea. I thought I was bombing. Um, And so sometimes you just meet that like listening audience. And it's again about expectations. It's about the room. You perform at a college, for 5 students. You perform for whoever, and sometimes people just have an expectation. They maybe have never been to a poetry slam, right? So they think they're seeing literature, right? And so they behave, like, or they think they're in church, right? They're just like, they come from like a stiff religious background, and so they're just being quiet, and so you're just not getting a lot of feedback, but they actually love it.
Excellent. Well, as this is a silly show, if you've seen any of the other episodes before, I am known as a kind of a silly bastard. So,
I got a slight taste, I skimmed the YouTube.
so I guess I will ask you a silly question here as we get towards the
Yeah.
end here. So, have you ever gotten out of an uncomfortable argument by singing something?
No,
You've
I
never, I mean,
never.
doesn't have to be somebody with, that you know very well, or maybe it's better with a family member or a friend that you know very well, but you've never gotten to that point where it's like you can kind of see their ire is up and it's getting to that point of anger and you're going like, and you
I
just
have
cut the tension.
I've never sang. I have slapped people though. I have open palmed slapped people,
You've really
strangers.
just unhinged.
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
God.
And yeah, there are men I've given loud smacks to, and told them to behave and that they're acting wrong, and they need to get their life right. And it's
What?
and it's
That's a
the really
record.
shocking thing.
That's
And
a
guy
record scratch moment for me. I didn't see
and
that
big,
coming.
like I remember, at a poetry event at a bar, after the event on the sidewalk, like argument starts, and it wasn't hard. It wasn't like a punch or a fight. It was like a wake up call, like smack, and like, hey buddy, you need to get your life right, like here's your wake up call. And people are really shocked and surprised when you say that to them. um
I think anybody would be surprised with that. You just,
Yeah,
the best thing you
like
don't see
you
it
like
coming.
yeah, fix your heart, like
This is not a Hallmark card. Yeah. Yeah, I've been in situations before where I I've been known to say the wrong thing at the wrong time, but I've had people just kind of get in my face, and the only thing I can, and they're arguing and they're like right here, and the only thing I've thought to say is kind of just like just almost like a Monty Python kind of just gut knee jerk reaction. It's just like, your point is well conceded. Please don't punch me in the face. And they're just like,
hmm,
uh, this guy is weirder than I thought, and they just kind of back off
yeah,
something,
that's good.
or just I don't know. I had an argument years ago with a history professor, and she was just and it was just like in the hallway, just kind of conversation, and it just I don't know what happened, but it just escalated and escalated, and I'm not going to sing what I said because it was really long, but just kind of like saying something like God, what was so weird that she just literally was just like, oh. It was something like well, when the Romans moved to Constantinople, they didn't call themselves Byzantines, and she went, well, fine, just walked away, just kind of like,
Yeah.
you know. But okay, well, now that we've beat that horse to death, so as we wrap it up here, what's coming up next for you, and where can people find your work online?
Oh yeah. Well, you can purchase my book on Powell's. I would, I mean, you can get it on Amazon, and if you're strapped, sometimes Amazon is best if you're like strapped for cash. And I don't want to shame anyone for using Amazon, but if you can not use Amazon, that's also great. So I always recommend going on Powell's. Powell's the big bookstore in Portland.
Mhm.
They have my books. You can look up my name on Powell's website and find my books. And I just came out with. I put up 2 books last year. So I put out a book of poetry Against Common Sense, which I read from, and also a book of short stories at the very beginning of 2023 in January. I came out with a book of short stories called Pretty Much the Last Hardcore Kid in This Town.
Mm.
Um, and so both of those you can find online. I'm going on tour for the first time in over 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I'm flying to the East Coast. I'm going back to like my poetry home, which is the Cantab Lounge. I'm going to be at the Cantab Lounge on April 3rd, and then Slam Free or Die, which is in Manchester, New Hampshire, on April 4th. And then the following Tuesday, April 9th, I'm going to be in Portland, Maine. So I'm going to be in the other Portland, which is exciting
Portland
to
to
me.
Portland.
Portland to Portland, yeah.
I can see the t-shirts. Um, well, thank you so much for being on the show and putting up with my chicanery and being a trooper and
I
nothing but
love
awesome.
I love chicanery.
Nothing
I love mesmerism.
but well, thank you so much for being on the show. Nothing but great things to say. This will be up online on Wednesday the 13th. And Brian, just have yourself a great weekend and get out there and do something fun. And thank you again.
Thanks, Eric.
No problem. Have a great one.
Yeah, nice
Bye
talking to
now.
you.
Bye.